Well, even though the Atlanta Braves haven't been very active this offseason, it's been a very interesting one nonetheless. I got Grant McAuley joining the podcast today. We're going to break down everything that hasn't happened so far this offseason and what might happen going forward. That on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastriani, and you can follow me on social media at Shortstop Ball. Check out the podcast there at LockedOn_Braves. If you're new and watching this on YouTube, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button as well, and leave me a comment down below, as it does help the show out a ton whenever you do those things. If you're listening on the audio version, you can help out by leaving me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And thanks as always for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. Well, you've heard me rumble about the offseason already and what has not happened, and trying to keep people in check of what could still happen this offseason. Today, you'll also get to hear those rumblings from Grant McAuley, who's going to join me on the show. And you can also start the NFL season off. Well, NFL season's almost over, but you can get a big return still on FanDuel with new customers. Can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just head to FanDuel.com to get started. Well, Grant, thank you always for joining the podcast. Always appreciate getting your insight every time that you jump on here. And anytime I get to talk Braves baseball with you, it's always a fun time. So thank you so much for jumping on today's show. As I was kind of alluding to, not much has happened so far for the Atlanta Braves this offseason, so we haven't had a ton to talk about. But this offseason overall, just outside of the Braves, I think it's been a very interesting one. I know your winter meetings plans got cut a little short, and I think that's what a lot of people want to know. Give us the update on Han. Is doing okay, doing much better?
Yeah, he's doing great. And if things go awry, you might even actually hear him in the background. He is up to his old tricks with his brother Chewie. So if you may or may not know, I have Star Wars dogs, and they're very exciting. But they're both very healthy, and we're happy to have them both just running around and running the house here, heading into the holidays. And our older girl, Nora, is also doing well. So we're a 3-dog household. And when the news came down, I couldn't hang out in Dallas for a couple of more days to wait on maybe nothing to happen. I had to get on home, and I didn't miss much in the final couple of days. But while I was there, I got to talk to Alex Anthopoulos, got to talk to a lot of baseball folks from around the game, a little bit about the Braves, and catch up with Brian Snitker. So I did everything I could, but I just couldn't make any moves.
Yeah, and that's been the problem. And there's been a lot of people trying many things. It's kind of like going back to this past year. We were doing whatever we could to try to get the offense going. I feel like fans are doing whatever they can to try to get the moves going, to get something to happen. But it has been an unusual offseason. I kind of just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And typically with Alex Anthopoulos, we see him work quick, and he did this offseason. What is the day after the World Series that he traded Jorge Soler not long after it. But what we've seen so far, Grant, is really just subtraction, cost cutting. We haven't seen him spend any money, and that's unusual because, like I said, Alex, he normally gets his deals done quick. So I want to get your thoughts just on that, just the silence from Alex in terms of adding. And do you think this market has played a big part of that?
Yeah, the market's been interesting in that, and we can probably pick this apart a little bit more. I don't know how exactly you feel about it, but I've kind of looked at a lot of these deals, and I haven't necessarily saw one that I'm like, man, well, the Braves should have been in on that one, without question. I mean, are there moves that they could have made, trades that they could have made here, especially lately this week? There's a little bit more movement in the non-premier player category, which I don't think that the Braves necessarily had to go get a premier player. I don't want to spoil anybody's holidays, but they don't necessarily need that if they can get their premier players back and healthy next year. But kind of putting that aside, usually you see Alex move fast, and it's that he's bringing someone in, not that he's offloading and balancing books and budgets and whatnot. But I do think all of those moves were for a purpose beyond simply, hey, we're trying to get under the luxury tax and stay well below it. I do think they have moves to make. I do think that they are going to do it. And as the case has been a lot, and I know you can attest to this, and we've done a lot of shows the past 3 years, you don't usually see it coming, who it is that they go out and get. We were not anticipating Chris Sale becoming an Atlanta Brave last year, nor were we expecting Reynaldo Lopez to sign and become an all-star starter. There are still moves and things that can happen. So I don't want to be just blindly optimistic about it, but there's a significant chunk of the winter left, just under 2 months before pitchers and catchers report, and a ton of players that either don't have homes as free agents or still could be traded. So I think there's opportunity out there. And right now it looks like the Braves are just trying to size up where exactly the best fit is. I think they need another starter. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I also think that they could use a high leverage reliever because of what has happened to the back end of their bullpen outside of Raisel Iglesias. And another outfielder would certainly be helpful. So we know what the shopping list is. We know who the free agents are. But I think the one thing that stuck out to me that Alex Anthopoulos told us a couple of times already this winter, right after the postseason ended for the Braves, before the World Series, and right before the winter meetings, is you don't know how the trade market's going to shape up. And that is where I feel like there's a lot of focus for the Atlanta Braves.
And that's where, look, I think we all know this as Braves fans now, and following this team. I'm not expecting them to go out and spend $218 million on Max Fried. I'm not expecting them to spend $700 million on Juan Soto. That's just never been the case for this franchise. That's even pre-Alex Anthopoulos.
Yeah.
This franchise has just never gone out and done that in free agency. And so, yeah, you felt like if the Braves were going to make a big move, it was going to be in the trade market.
Mm-hmm.
But those prices have even been inflated to the point where I don't know if the Braves really could have competed in that. You look at a Garrett Crochet, who I loved. I'm very high on Garrett Crochet, and it's somebody I really wanted the Braves to go after. But the Braves couldn't really compete with that offer. A Kyle Till, a Braden Montgomery, 2 top 100 prospects, really couldn't compete with that. And even in the Kyle Tucker trade, that would have been a perfect fit for the Atlanta Braves. I love Kyle Tucker, a potential 30-30 bat, but the Braves didn't have that Cam Smith that they could put in that deal to go get him either. So that is, I think, where the farm system has hurt them a little bit. And you look, you never know what teams are wanting. You knew the White Sox were wanting bats. That's just not what the Braves have. I don't necessarily know exactly the Astros were wanting, but clearly they went and got some bats and a Paredes and a Cam Smith in that deal. You know, if there's a team out there that's looking for pitching, some young pitching depth that they could trade from, but they just don't have the position player depth to really make those types of moves. So those are two guys to me, all the free agents said, there's nobody that's really signed that I said, Braves probably could have done that deal, should have done that deal. But those are some trades, those are big pieces, control or affordable, at least not controllable in the terms of Tucker. But I just don't think the Braves had the prospects that those teams were looking for to be able to compete in those deals.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me is, I heard this at the winter meetings from a couple of different places, is that the Braves, I think, were interested in Garrett Crochet, but from what I understand, Drake Baldwin was a sticking point for Atlanta in those negotiations in particular. Now, usually we don't know when a Braves move is going to happen until we see that little blue box come across social media, but I put a lot of stock in where I heard it from, so I do believe Drake Baldwin is a guy that the Braves have looked at and thought, okay, even if we've got Sean Murphy for multiple years behind the plate, I think they believe in the bat an awful lot as well. We know Marcell Ozuna is only under contract for one more year. Maybe they're looking at Baldwin as somebody who is going to take another step at the plate. Either way, putting all of that aside or putting all of it in the pot together, we can understand that the Braves value him very highly, and they're not going to give him away necessarily for certainly a one-year rental player, and even for a controllable starting pitcher. They were hesitant to do it. And of course, I don't know what else might have been in that trade. So it might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, or it might have just been a complete non-starter. But I know that they are extremely high on Drake Baldwin. And while the position player prospects for the Atlanta Braves are not obviously as numerous as the arms have been over the years, this is somebody to keep an eye on. And this is somebody, obviously, that the Braves value quite a bit. And, it's been a minute since we've been able to get really excited about a position player prospect.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I would have traded Drake Baldwin, but I'm obviously, not seeing him every day. But that's just, I think it speaks more to what I feel about Garrett Crochet and getting a guy that I think can be an ace. But again, even if you put Drake Baldwin, even if they were willing to, kind of back to my point a minute ago, that maybe matches up with Kyle Till that the Red Sox gave up, but there's not that other guy in that Braden Montgomery that I don't think Nacho Alvarez is to that degree. And from everything that I heard, the Red Sox really outmatched what everybody else was offering in terms of what, Garrett Crochet was
quality. Yeah.
But yeah, that's very interesting to hear you say that, how well or how highly the Braves think of Drake Baldwin, because I'm kind of that belief too. It's not that I don't like him, but you do have Sean Murphy there for a while. And so it's kind of what is his path. And obviously, as you mentioned, you have the DH that could potentially be opening up after the season where he could get at bats. But that's exciting. Like you said, I'm glad to hear that. Even if I'm not the biggest, I don't want to say supporter, but even if I'm not, has been excited about Drake Baldwin, I very much trust the Braves and their Italian valuation more than I do. So that's very exciting. Guy we could potentially see this year at some point. So I want to touch on the catch position again a minute, because it feels like for several off seasons in a row now, Grant, we've been talking about a loss of leadership for this Atlanta Braves team. It feels like every offseason, I know we both have people asking us, who's the leader for this Braves team? And with the departure of, another franchise guy and Max Fried, not that necessarily anybody I think was looking for him for leadership, but Travis d'Arnaud as well has a new team. So I think we're once again having to answer that question. Who is the leader in this clubhouse? We'll answer that question and more here and next. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely has happened to me. My kids, sometimes they get that remote, they just start subscribing for stuff, and I don't really know it until I see it come across. So you can check all that with Rocket Money, which is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. The World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. In sports, winning is everything. And that's why you always need a good strategy to keep you moving towards the goalpost. Winning strategies for life are just as important, and that's where SelectQuote can help you protect your legacy and your family's financial future. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go check out Locked On MLB for your second listen. And also make sure you head over to From the Diamond, where you get Grant McAuley's podcast and all the great stuff that he's covering over there. All right, Grant, let's jump back into this discussion. I want to stick on the catcher position, not necessarily the catcher position, but I was surprised. I don't know about you. I don't think we've talked about it yet. I was a little shocked to see them not bring back Travis d'Arnaud and then to see Travis d'Arnaud sign with the Angels. And I'm not saying that the Braves necessarily had to have him, but he was that veteran guy in the clubhouse, and he was one of those veteran leaders. And now you hear talks of them perhaps really not all that interested in Charlie Morton either, who is another one of your veterans. And again, I'm not necessarily saying they have to have a Charlie Morton. I think he's replaceable, but he was one of their veteran leaders. And now you've had an 3-4 off seasons ago, whatever it was, you lost Freddie Freeman, you lost Dansby, and now Max Fried goes this year, and now you're letting some of your veterans go. I think a lot of people are asking, what are the Braves doing with some of these guys who seem to be such pillars of this Braves team?
I mean, they definitely have been, and played the role insofar as they were, in a Braves uniform. But time marches on, I think, is something that we're reminded of. And sometimes it comes a little bit quicker than we would like for certain players. We don't need to rehash Freddie Freeman's exit. That, I think, is probably the strangest tale of all of them. You saw that Dansby Swanson, I think, priced his way out of Atlanta. Max Fried did as well. Both of those guys got great contracts. But when it comes to a guy like Travis d'Arnaud, even a guy like Charlie Morton, which, by the way, are two of my favorite guys on the team to talk to, because they would give you kind of the insight of, how I think if you want to check the pulse of the team, you knew certain places you could go. And those were two that I always like to lean on and lean into to get that kind of info. But I think a few things happened for a confluence of events for Travis d'Arnaud. He's a catcher who's going to get a little bit older, and at $8 million, that's a pretty pricey backup. And I say that because Sean Murphy this year all of a sudden got a little bit more expensive. And even though he's coming off what he would, I'm sure, look at as not just a down year, but kind of a lost season in a lot of ways for him, you've got to expect more. You've got to ask more. You've got to get more out of Sean Murphy. And if all of those things are aligned, can you afford to pay a second catcher $8 million to be around? That's an expensive insurance policy, even if he brings a lot of intangibles to the team, which Travis d'Arnaud certainly did. I think that could bring you back to my Drake Baldwin point, which is the Braves value him very highly. They're not looking to throw him out of the frying pan and into the fire. They're not looking to throw him in the deep end or all of these other things by asking him to do too much too fast. But I feel like they have somebody they believe in if they have to find someone to cover a lot of playing time should there be another injury. And for Travis, going back to Southern California, being around his family, that's got to be a big boost for him. He gets a 2-year deal, $12 million. I would have loved to see the Braves bring him back maybe for a lesser amount. And also with the understanding that Sean Murphy was going to catch more, because I think Sean, based on his contract and the expectation, needs to play more. I don't think that that's a stretch by anybody's imagination. I heard so many people, even in Sean's down year, saying, look, what are we doing? If he's not going to get most of the playing time, why isn't he starting more? Well, he was struggling. You were trying to do what you could. It was a very weird year, but moving into 2025 and beyond, I believe it's 4 more years for Sean Murphy in a Braves uniform. You've got to get more out of him, and for him to be healthy, and if he is healthy, he's got to be the guy who's catching 2/3 or more of the time. I think that's what they want out of him, at least over the next couple of seasons. And what does that mean for Drake Baldwin long term? I don't know. So I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but I feel like you've got a guy that you can believe in as a starter, and you've got an heir apparent if you need that. And you can, of course, have a fluid plan for how exactly you want to maybe get that other guy some more at bats. So I hope that answered the question. The leadership thing is a lot more granular, I will say that. But I talked to Brian Snitker at the winter meetings. You can hear the whole thing on From the Diamond this past week. I asked him about the leadership and the guys who have walked out the door and how do you replace those? And he said, I look at the group and the sum of the group, all of the parts that are in there. I'm not worried about that. I've never been worried about that. Even with some of our other losses, this team always seems to find a way to find the leadership that it needs inside those 4 walls. And if he believes that and the team believes that, that's good enough for me, even if it may not look like that all the time, that there's that loud, vocal, front and center guy. Sometimes some teams, they just don't have that.
Yeah, and like I've said before when discussing this topic, the Braves won 101 games after Freddie Freeman left. They won 104 games after Dansby Swanson left. Even after everything happened last year, still won 89 games and got to the postseason. Now people will point to, well, what did they do in the postseason? And maybe that's a discussion. We don't really know. It's hard to quantify that. But yeah, I mean, it's got to be a next man up thing too. Like, it's time. Maybe this is Austin Riley's team. I mean, he is the guy that's going to be here going forward. Maybe he's going to have to step up in that leadership role a little bit more. So there's plenty of guys in there. And again, no matter, you still hear it, I know you're closer to it than I am, that it's still a tight-knit clubhouse, and everybody works well together and meshes well together. And Alex brings in people that aren't going to disrupt that. We've heard that from him as well before. I don't want to make this a Drake Baldwin podcast, but I also, you mentioned it too, they're not going to throw him into the fire. There's people that think he's just going to be in this role from the start. I don't see that happening. Well, I've heard some people suggest, well, maybe they'll trade Sean Murphy and give Drake Baldwin the job. The Braves have always highly valued having a veteran catcher behind the plate for a while now. I just don't think there's any world where they just all of a sudden throw Drake Baldwin in there. I think it would be a situation where maybe you do ease him in, maybe you get him at bats in the DH and part-time and the catcher in that situation. Is that kind of how you read it, that Murphy is the guy, but maybe Drake Baldwin down the road?
That's how I read it for right now. And I mean, obviously plans can change, but I'll say this as well. And Alex Anthopoulos has said this. So more importantly than anything, I say or you say on this podcast, they didn't sign these guys to extensions to start trading them away 2, 3, 4 years in. I mean, the Braves don't hand out no trade clauses, but the indication that I've gotten from both Alex Anthopoulos' comments and anybody else's is there is all but a complete guarantee that, hey, we see you in our picture. We want you around for a long time. That's why we're giving you these years. So I don't look at them with any of the guys they've extended, whether that's, and quite obviously, Austin Riley. I've heard trade, discussions or rumors about, would the Braves deal Ozzie Albies? It would surprise me if they did that. Obviously, Ron Acuna Jr., Matt Olson, Spencer Strider, Michael Harris. You can go on down the line, and Sean Murphy's name is also on that list. Those are guys that I don't look at as pieces for various reasons for various guys that you're going to be looking to move. But to be more specific about the catcher thing, again, I think the expectations for Sean Murphy is to get his career back on track, to take the lion's share of the work behind the plate, both in 2025 and beyond. And you'll figure out what you need to with Drake Baldwin. And I think that this may not be the sexy answer or whatnot, but they like Chadwick Tromp and the pitchers like working with him. And as a backup catcher in the major leagues, he's perfectly adequate. But that does take into account that Sean Murphy needs to be catching the majority of the time, getting the majority of the starts.
And he's got to stay healthy to do that. I mean, certainly last year, as you said, pretty much a lost season from day one. Second half of 2023, rumors that maybe he was dealing with some things then, or not even some rumors. There were some reports that he was dealing with some things then. So he's just got to stay healthy. And I'm certainly excited. And I want to see Murphy get 2 out of every 3 games. I want to see that big workload for him going forward and see him be that guy. And as you mentioned, I like Trump too. I was excited last year when the Braves were able to bring Trump back, because every time he's been called upon, it seems like he's delivered at the big league level. So they do have some depth there at the catcher position. You hate to lose a guy like Travis d'Arnaud because what he means to the team and in the clubhouse, but I do think the Braves are okay there at the position overall. Grant, I think the Braves are okay just in general. Let me read you what the roster and rotation could be if healthy, which is a big question. You're still looking at a roster that Acuna, Olsen, Riley, Ozuna, Ozzie, Michael Harris, Sean Murphy, a platoon maybe of Jared Kelenic and Brian De La Cruz and Orlando Arcia as your lineup. That's really good. I think most would consider that one of the best in baseball. You're looking at a rotation that, when healthy, Sell, Strider, Lopez, Schwellenbach, and then whoever you want to throw in that 5th spot. AJ Smith-Shawver, if he clicks, I think has a lot of upside. Bryce Elder, maybe Ian Anderson. There's a number of names who could compete for that position. And even in the bullpen, Iglesias, Pierce Johnson, Dylan Lee, Aaron Bummer, Grant Holmes, who I think did a great job there last year, Daysbel Hernandez with a big arm. Look, I'm not saying the Braves don't need to make some moves and certainly need to build out some quality depth, but I think there's a growing frustration from Braves fans, and somewhat rightfully so, that we're not seeing anything happen this year and that other teams are passing us by. But I think we have to take a step back and realize that front office is probably looking at this and saying, okay, when we're healthy, this is a World Series roster. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I do agree with that. But in my conversations with both Alex Anthopoulos and with Brian Snitker, I mean, they want to find ways to get better this year. That's not to say that Orlando Arcia is going to get voted off the island. I think that he could have a role to play, but you want to have the other 7, if not 8 spots in the lineup be more rock solid than they were pretty much at any point in 2024. It was just a crazy year, and we don't have to rehash all of that. But I feel like in some ways he was a lightning rod for a lot of the criticism of the Braves lineup. But who in the world was saying, all right, well, it's going to come down to what Orlando Arcia does tonight if the Braves are going to win or lose? That was just never the way they were designed. So you get Ronald Acuna Jr. back. Obviously, that's going to make a big impact. Getting Austin Riley back in there every day, something that he desires to be, that everyday player. I don't need to say that for Matt Olson, but I'll say it anyway. You've got the makings of a great core in that lineup, and then you start putting Ozzie Albies and Michael Harris and Marcell Ozuna, who's been one of the best power hitters in baseball the last couple of years. Yes, all of these things look good in this lineup, but I think they could use a little bit more. I'll go on the record now. I don't think it's a hot take. I think Brian De La Cruz is going to take more at-bats in Gwinnett than he's going to take in Atlanta. That's just my read on things. I think that there's some other move to make, even if it happens in spring training the way it did a year ago with Adam Duvall. Granted, that move didn't really work out. Duvall wasn't much of a factor for the Braves last year, but I think there's going to be other players still looking for work later in the offseason, and the Braves might be able to swoop in and have their pick of a couple of nice players who could play a role, especially until you get Acuna back, whenever that is. And I don't think there's some indication that Ronald has to miss a ton of time. They're just not going to push him and make opening day kind of a symbolic date that he has to be back. And I think that's probably for the best. It's probably smart to just bring him along at the right pace, get him in there, get him comfortable, and let him be the player that he can be. Bullpen-wise, I do think that they need to go pick up at least one arm who's capable of getting some middle to later inning leverage outs. You don't need another closer. Doesn't have to be anybody who's higher leverage than even a Pierce Johnson, but somebody similar to that I think would be helpful, because losing Joe Jimenez for perhaps the whole season, the Braves did not have that in their plans, quite obviously. And I think with no AJ Minter as well, at least not at the moment, you don't know what his future is. That's been your most valuable reliever the last 4 years, and I will die on that hill. So you add an innings-eating starter who's got some upside as well, just a veteran guy that can just stabilize things. I think they could be ready to ride. But this, to me, and I'd be interested to hear your take, it's kind of the longest list that the Braves have had to shop over the course of a winter of needs the last few years, even though they've done a pretty nice job with the Sales and the Lopez's of the world of backfilling things and creating a team that finds its way into October. Even if the results in October, everyone will stipulate, have not been what we wanted.
They haven't been, but to answer your question there, I do think this is an offseason where you actually have needs. I mean, you have needs in the rotation, you have needs in the bullpen, which I think we're certainly weren't helped when you had the Jimenez injury,
No.
and you have needs in the outfit. I mean, last offseason, Alex was just going out there and moving pieces all around the chessboard just to go get a Jared Kelenic, because honestly, there just wasn't a lot to do. And if we knew that Strider and Acuna were healthy going into the season, I think you could almost say the same thing, that you're in a similar situation, but you just don't know that.
Right.
And again, there's a lot of people speculating Acuna, Strider might miss the first 2 months of the season. We won't know that until we really get to spring training and see how these guys are progressing and what they look like. I mean, I'm optimistic. I don't think they'll miss that much time, but I also don't think, especially in the case of Acuna, they're going to rush anything. So yeah, there definitely are moves that need to be made and can be made, and there's still a lot of time left, and there's still some options left. I want to get your final thoughts on that. Also want to get your thoughts on a former Atlanta Brave who is now a Washington National, and Mike Soroka. We'll discuss that here and next. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get a $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you can also check out their odds for the upcoming Major League Baseball season. Currently, the Braves have the third best odds at plus 800, right behind the Yankees and a good bit behind the Dodgers, and also right in front of the New York Mets. They also have league winners out there, division winners, award winners, all of that. You can see it at FanDuel.com. And again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Also, make sure you visit FanDuel.com/play-safe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way that you play. Never waste a hunch and make everyone more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Well, Grant, let's wrap things up here. Talking about, I think it's some good news. I mean, we've talked about Mike Soroka a lot on here. He gets a deal with the Washington Nationals, 1 year, $9 million. I mean, that's good money for a guy, and he's going to get a chance to be a starter again. And, there's a lot of talk this offseason after the success he had last year with the White Sox as a reliever, that maybe somebody was going to give him a big deal as a reliever, but Nats apparently are at least going to give him a chance to start. And I'm excited. Hate somewhat that he's coming back in the division, because you just know he's going to punish the Braves. So is Griffin Canning, who obviously got picked up by the Mets as well. But I am excited for Soroka. I want to see what he can do and hope that he can get back to being the starter. And as I saw somebody joke on social media, maybe the Braves will just trade for him at the deadline and bring him back in here. But I hope he's pitching that well that teams want him at the deadline.
No doubt about it. One of my absolute favorite people that I have met in the game of baseball is Michael Soroka. He is a thoughtful and intentional, and not to mention talented young man whose career was derailed by injuries. I know that it took him a long time just to get back to the big leagues. It felt like, at least to me, and maybe it's because of where the Braves were, they just didn't feel like that they could give him the starts and the innings to figure things out at the big league level. And that obviously was a shame after how long we waited to see him maybe get back and recapture that form. Did not get off to a great start with the White Sox, and that might be putting it lightly. I mean, you look at the numbers overall, you might not be thinking that this is a guy that got $9 million, but first 9 starts before he got bumped out of the rotation, ERA of nearly 6.5 and an opponent's OPS of about 850. Move him to the bullpen, a 2.75 ERA to close out the year with 60 strikeouts in 36 innings. I mean, that, as they say, will play. I'm fascinated to see what he's figured out and how that will go with him to transition back into the rotation. But he's still young, which is a crazy thing to say when you think about how long we've talked about Michael Soroka. But I'm hoping that he can find some success in Washington, because I think you're right. He might find his way to a contender at the trade deadline if the Nationals have played their cards right here. And I am selfishly excited to have a chance to catch up with Michael throughout the course of the 2025 season and just kind of see what's been going on in his world, because I'm happy to see that he was able to figure it out, because you had to kind of wonder after the start with the White Sox and kind of how things had gone in his end of his career with the Braves, is he ever going to find his way back, or is he just going to be one of those what-if players? I'm hoping that's not the case, because if he's gotten it back on track, he's got a long time to have himself a nice little career.
Yeah, certainly hope so. Like I said, definitely somebody I'm always going to be rooting for. Want to see him get back on track. A little bit other news from the day. Philly signed Max Kepler to a 1 year, $10 million deal. No, that's somebody, a lot of people were looking at maybe for the Braves as a left-handed bat, but $10 million. I mean, you look at Soroka, $9 million, look at Kepler, $10 million. Some of these prices, even on, guys you wouldn't expect, they're getting, double-digit millions. So that's just kind of the market this offseason. Let's finish it up with this, though. I know you've explained your needs for the Braves. Need an outfielder, need a starting pitcher, need a relief pitcher. Which one do you think is more critical for the Atlanta Braves? Which move do they have to make this offseason?
I think they're going to get an outfielder, but it may not be somebody who's a notable or big name per se. But I think the most important thing they could do is get a starter. And I asked Brian Snitker about this because we saw how the Braves have managed their rotation, especially in 24. It's not about a 5-man rotation. It's about those extra days of rest, about keeping guys fresh over the course of the season. I think they're going to want to do that again, and not because of Chris Sale and Ronaldo Lopez, but because of Spencer Strider. I think they're going to want to have the ability to give him those extra days. And then Sale, Lopez, sure, you can reset the rotation as you need to, but I feel like they'd like to do it with fewer moving parts than they had to do it with last year, shuttling guys back and forth from Gwinnett to Atlanta. Some of them, okay, some of them not so good. I think you just like to have more continuity there. So I'll say a starting pitcher, somebody who can come in and just fortify the middle to back end of the rotation and allow Spencer Strider to kind of seamlessly transition his way back in without too much pressure, though. I don't know if you've met Spencer Strider. I've talked to him quite a bit. He's rather intense, and I'm sure he's going to expect a lot of himself, but he's also going to have to give himself some grace as he comes back from a major elbow surgery, and I know the Braves are trying to manage him as responsibly as possible because he could have some big innings to throw in the second half, and, of course, in October, and the future for the Braves. You just want to be careful with how you bring him back.
Yeah, big part of your future going forward. So, like I said, with him really and Acuna, I mean, while you want them back as soon as possible, and I hope it's, earlier in the season, you certainly don't want to rush them back and jeopardize their future at all because they're big parts of your future going forward. But I'm right there with you. I think starting pitching, I want all of those things. I think it's starting pitching, outfield, and relief pitching for me. I want all of those, but starting pitching certainly is a top priority for me. You just got to have that depth there to get through 162. I'm interested in a guy like Ian Anderson too, out of minor league options.
Yep.
What does he look like in spring training? Can he at least get an opportunity to begin the year and see if he can hang on to one of those spots? So the Braves have some options there, but they need some guys to step up, and Ian Anderson and Bryce Elder, who's had, plenty of chances now, and AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop, some young guys. They have some guys there that could possibly fill in, but I think you got to go out and get somebody that can eat some innings for you, at least, kind of to your point with the outfielder. I don't think it has to be the top-notch guy, but I think it has to be somebody that can give you some innings, somebody that's reliable that you can count on. Well, Grant, thank you so much for joining me as always. Make sure you follow Grant on social media. Check out his podcast, From the Diamond, everywhere Grant is covering your Atlanta Braves. Does a fantastic job of it. So thankful that I get to call him up and have him on here whenever he is willing and able to come on. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to do this. And thank you all for listening to today's episode of A Locked On Braves. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button, leave me a comment down below, and make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we will talk to you next time.